The morning sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, painting golden lines across the wooden floor. The air inside the house felt still, peaceful, but almost too quiet. Emily stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee she hadn't yet tasted. Outside, the maple tree swayed lightly, scattering red and yellow leaves across the yard. It was a beautiful day. The kind she used to love, the kind that once meant family breakfasts, laughter, and the sound of her son's footsteps running down the hallway. But now, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of memories. She told herself she liked the quiet, that it was peaceful, that it gave her time to read, to think, to paint. But the truth sat quietly inside her heart. She missed noise. She missed the sound of life filling her home. Her son Daniel had been away for 3 years now, studying in another city. She was proud of him, so proud, yet every time she passed his empty room, she felt a hollow space she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was more like standing in sunlight but feeling the shadow of what used to be. Emily wasn't old, but time had changed her in gentle ways. The laughter lines around her eyes, the silver glints in her chestnut hair, they all told stories of love, loss, and years that passed too quickly. Still, she carried herself with quiet grace. She filled her days with small rituals, watering her plants, writing in her journal, humming to herself while cooking dinner for one. Yet there were moments quiet, unexpected moments when her heart ached for something she couldn't name. A feeling, perhaps, or a connection. Not romance, not adventure. Just the warmth of being seen, being needed. Sometimes, late at night, she would find herself scrolling through old photos. Daniel at his 6th birthday, missing his front tooth. Daniel on his first day of high school, taller than she'd realized. Daniel standing beside her at graduation, his arm around her shoulder. She remembered the way he'd looked at her then, proud, protective, grown-up, but still her boy. Now, thought of seeing him again made her heart flutter like it used to when she was young and nervous. He was coming home today. Just for a visit, he had said. But even that was enough to make her morning feel different, as if the air itself knew. Something special was about to happen. She spent the morning tidying the house. Not because it needed it, but because it gave her something to do with her restless hands. She replaced the flowers in the vase with fresh white lilies. She opened the windows to let the crisp autumn breeze in. She even baked the blueberry muffins Daniel used to love when he was little. The ones he'd sneak from the cooling rack when he thought she wasn't looking. As she waited, she caught a reflection in the kitchen window. Her eyes met her own, soft but searching, and for a fleeting second she wondered what would he see when he looked at her now. Would he still see the mother who always had the answers? Or would he see the woman who'd quietly learned how to live without him? The sound of tires on gravel broke her thoughts. She froze. A familiar car rolled into the driveway, sunlight glinting off the windshield. Her heart raced in her chest, a mix of joy and something deeper, a strange, tender ache. She stepped onto the porch, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. And then she saw him, Daniel, stepping out of the car. He was taller than she remembered, shoulders broader, his expression calmer. The boy who once clung to her hand had turned into a man. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to slow. His eyes met hers, warm, steady, and filled with something she couldn't quite read. In that single glance, years melted away. But something new began too. "Mom," he said softly, his voice deeper now, carrying a note of emotion she'd never heard before. "Daniel," she whispered, her throat tightening. They stood there for a second longer than either expected. Two people separated by time, but bound by love that never faded. When they finally hugged, Emily felt tears she hadn't planned on shedding. His embrace was strong, reassuring, and yet filled with the same tenderness she remembered that as she held him. She realized something she hadn't let herself feel before. He wasn't her little boy anymore. He was someone new, someone with stories she didn't yet know. That evening, after dinner, as the sun set behind the trees, Emily sat across from him at the kitchen table. The room was filled with soft laughter and the scent of coffee and muffins. She listened to him talk about school, his friends, his plans, but every time he paused, every time his gaze drifted away for just a second. She sensed it. There was something behind his calm smile, something unsaid. And though she didn't know what it was, she felt the faint stir of intuition deep within her chest. A mother's heart always knows when something is changing. That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emily sat alone in the living room. The house, though filled again with his presence, seemed wrapped in a quiet that carried both comfort and memory. A single lamp glowed beside her chair, casting a warm circle of light across the wooden floor. She opened her old photo album, the one she hadn't touched in years. The pages smelled faintly of time, a mix of paper and nostalgia. Her fingers brushed across pictures of birthdays, family picnics, and sunlit afternoons frozen in place then. Somewhere between those familiar smiles, she found a photograph she hadn't expected to see, one of her and a man standing beside the lake, both laughing. The moment captured something rare, a kind of joy that had once been effortless. His name was Michael. She remembered him like a song that never quite left her, not loud, not haunting, just quietly there beneath everything. They'd met years after her husband passed. Way two people finding comfort in simple company. He worked at the small bookstore downtown, the one she visited almost every Saturday. He always had a recommendation waiting, a soft smile, and a way of making every ordinary conversation feel meaningful. At first, she'd told herself it was nothing, just kindness, just friendship. But over time, the space between words began to mean more. She remembered one afternoon especially well. It had been raining hard, the kind of steady, rhythmic rain that fills every silence. She'd gone to the store anyway, soaked from the walk. Michael had handed her a towel with a grin, braving the weather for a good story. He'd teased gently, she had laughed, shaking her head. Some stories are worth it. They'd talked for hours that day about books, dreams, the small details of life that most people overlook. There was never any rush between them. No grand declarations. Just the soft rhythm of two hearts quietly understanding each other. Sometimes he'd walk her home, keeping a respectful distance but always making sure she got there safely. They'd part at her gate, exchange a simple goodnight. And yet Emily would spend the rest of the evening thinking about the warmth of his presence. It had been a delicate kind of connection, built not on what was said, but on what was felt. But life, as it often does, had other plans. When Daniel was accepted into college, Emily's world shifted. Her time was spent helping him prepare, packing, planning, reassuring him he'd be fine. In those busy months, she saw Michael less often. He understood, of course. He never made her choose, never asked for anything. Then one afternoon, she went by the bookstore only to find the shelves half empty and a for sale sign in the window. The owner said Michael had moved away closer to his sister's family in another state. He'd left no note, no goodbye, just quiet absence. She remembered standing there, the sunlight spilling through the glass, her reflection overlapping the empty shelves. It felt like turning the last page of a story she hadn't realized had ended. 4 months after, she'd sometimes walk past the lake where they once talked, listening to the soft sound of rippling water and the faint echo of laughter carried by memory. It wasn't heartbreak exactly, more like the bittersweet ache of something unfinished, something that had mattered even if it hadn't lasted. Now, years later, with Daniel sleeping down the hall, she wondered if he ever felt that same pull toward the past, that quiet longing for a moment that once made everything feel whole. She closed the photo album and leaned back, her eyes glistening but calm. It wasn't sadness that filled her, it was gratitude. Michael had reminded her, in that small, gentle chapter of her life, that love doesn't always arrive to stay. Sometimes it visits just long enough to remind you what it feels like to be alive, outside. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, the same scent she remembered from that day at the bookstore. Emily smiled softly. The past didn't hurt anymore. It was part of her, woven into who she had become. And as she turned off the lamp and made her way upstairs, she realized something quietly profound. The heart doesn't stop loving just because life moves on. It simply learns to love differently in that understanding. There was peace. She paused by Daniel's door, listening to his steady breathing. The sound comforted her. For all that had changed, some things remained constant: love, connection, the invisible thread that ties past and present together. Emily whispered a soft goodnight and walked to her room, the memories still warm in her chest. The following morning dawned quietly, wrapped in soft light and the scent of rain from the night before. Emily woke early, long before Daniel stirred. She brewed coffee, the gentle hiss of the machine filling the silence, and opened the back door to let in the crisp autumn air. She had almost grown used to mornings alone, but today, the sound of footsteps upstairs reminded her that life had come home again. Even if only for a little while. Daniel joined her a few minutes later, his hair still tousled from sleep, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Smells good," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "It's your favorite blend," she replied with a soft grin. "You still take it with too much sugar?" He laughed. Old habits die hard. The easy rhythm between them returned more naturally than Emily expected. Conversation flowed like it used to. Light, warm, filled with pauses that didn't need to be filled. But every so often, she caught him watching her with quiet thoughtfulness, as though he was seeing her differently, not just as his mother, but as a person with her own stories. Later that day, Daniel offered to help run a few errands. Emily needed to stop by town, the small grocery store, the post office, and a quick visit to the bookstore. She hadn't been inside in years. She almost changed her mind at the door of that last stop. The place had been renovated, larger windows, new shelves, yet the faint smell of paper and ink was the same. And as soon as she stepped inside, her heart gave a strange, sudden flutter. There, behind the counter, sorting through a stack of books, was Michael. His hair was more silver now, his face lined in the kind way that life leaves behind on people who have loved deeply. But his presence, calm, kind, steady, was unmistakable. He looked up. Their eyes met. It was only a second, but it felt like the years folded in on themselves. Time didn't rush or rewind. It simply softened. "Emily?" His voice carried that same warmth, though quieter, more careful now. She smiled, her breath catching just slightly. "Michael, I didn't know you were back. Moved home a few months ago," he said, his expression gentle but unsure. Didn't expect to see a familiar face so soon. Before she could respond, Daniel appeared beside her, holding a bag of coffee beans. "They still have your favorite, Mom." He turned to Michael and nodded politely. "Hi, I'm Daniel." Michael smiled in recognition. "I remember you. You were much shorter the last time I saw you." Daniel chuckled, shaking his hand. "That must have been a while ago." Emily's heart filled with something she couldn't name, a quiet warmth mixed with old emotion, a tenderness untouched by time. The conversation stayed light. Books, memories of the town, the little cafe that used to stand across the street. But beneath every word, something unspoken moved. Not tension, but the echo of what once was. When they left the store, Daniel noticed her lingering glance back toward the window. "Old friend?" he asked casually. She nodded, smiling faintly. "Something like that." They spent the afternoon running the rest of their errands. But Emily's thoughts drifted back to that moment. The way Michael had looked at her. The same kindness in his eyes, untouched by distance or years. It wasn't longing she felt, or regret, just the gentle comfort of remembering someone who once saw her clearly. That evening, after dinner, Daniel found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. Watching the twilight settle over the garden, he sat beside her quietly. "You okay?" She nodded, her gaze still on the fading sky. "Do you ever feel like the past finds you again when you least expect it?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Yeah, I think sometimes it finds us to remind us who we used to be." Emily smiled, the corners of her eyes softening. "Maybe that's true." For a while, they sat in silence. The only sound, the rustle of leaves and the gentle hum of crickets. Then Daniel spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "That man at the bookstore, he looked happy to see you." She laughed quietly, surprised by his intuition. "He's an old friend. We used to talk a lot when you were younger. life just went in different directions. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Maybe some people are meant to circle back, even if it's just to say hello again. His words lingered in the cool air, and Emily felt something shift inside her. Not dramatically, not painfully, but softly. Like the closing of one chapter and the gentle opening of another. That night, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror again. There was a lightness in her expression she hadn't seen in a long time. The quiet glow of someone who had reconnected not just with a person, but with a part of herself she thought was gone. As she turned off the light, she smiled to herself. Life, it seemed, had a way of giving back little pieces of what it once took away, not to relive the past, but to remind you it had mattered. The next few days moved slowly, the kind of calm that seems to stretch time itself. Autumn had begun to deepen. The trees blazed gold and crimson, and the evenings turned cool enough for sweaters and shared cups of tea. Emily found herself thinking of Michael more often than she meant to. Not with longing, but with curiosity about where life had taken him, about the quiet chapters they never got to write. One morning, while Daniel met a friend in town, Emily walked alone to the park. The path wound through rustling trees toward the lake. The same lake where she and Michael had once stood years ago, laughing about nothing in particular. She smiled faintly at the memory. When she reached the water's edge, she saw someone standing there. It took her only a heartbeat to recognize him. Michael, she called softly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a gentle smile. Emily, I didn't expect company this early. She walked closer, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. I come here sometimes. It's quiet. They stood side by side, watching the ripples stretch across the surface. The morning light caught the water in a way that made everything shimmer, almost like time itself had softened around them. After a long pause, he spoke. I thought about reaching out when I moved back, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. Emily's voice was calm but honest. I wondered what happened to you. You've just disappeared one day. He nodded slowly. My sister got sick. I went to help her, and 1 month turned into several years. I always meant to write, but by the time I could, it felt like too much time had passed. There was no anger in her, just understanding. Life, she knew, often pulled people in unexpected directions. I missed our talks, she said quietly. They made those years easier. Michael looked at her then, his eyes carrying the same kindness she remembered, but also something deeper. Something that came from living a little more, losing a little more, and learning what really mattered. I missed them too, he said. You were the one person who always made the ordinary feel important. They both smiled, a little shyly, as though revisiting an old language they hadn't spoken in years. For a while, they simply stood there to people who had once shared something gentle and real. Now meeting again, not to rekindle the past, but to honor it. I'm glad you came back. Emily finally said. I am too, he replied, and I'm glad you're still here. The wind picked up slightly, carrying a few golden leaves across the water. She watched them drift and thought about how everything in life eventually circles back, sometimes not to stay, but to bring closure. When they said goodbye, it wasn't sad. It felt right. There were no promises, no unfinished words, just mutual gratitude for the time that had shaped them both. That evening, Daniel found his mother sitting by the fire, her eyes calm and reflective. You look peaceful, he said, handing her a cup of tea. She smiled. I think I am. He hesitated, then spoke softly. You know, I've been meaning to tell you something too. Emily looked up, curious. I'm not sure I want to go back to law school, he said carefully. I tried to convince myself it was the right path, Dad's path, but it doesn't feel like mine. I want to write. Maybe teach. Something that means something to me. Emily's eyes softened. Then that's what you should do, Daniel. He looked surprised. You're not disappointed? She reached over and took his hand. I'd only be disappointed if you lived a life that wasn't your own. You've spent so long becoming who you're meant to be. I just want you to be proud of that person. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, painting their faces in golden light. Finally, Caniel whispered, "I think I needed to come home to remember who I am." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. "And I needed you to come home to remind me who I used to be." The two of them sat there until the fire burned low, a mother and son, both changed by time, both learning to let go of old expectations and embrace the simple truth of love in its purest form. As the night settled around them, Emily felt a deep peace she hadn't known in years. The ache of the past had softened into something beautiful, a gentle acceptance that life was never about holding on too tightly, but about cherishing what stayed long enough to matter before going to bed. She stood by the window, looking out at the starlit garden. Somewhere out there, Michael was likely doing the same. And though their paths had once crossed and diverged, she was grateful for every step of it in that moment. She realized that love doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes it means understanding, forgiveness, and knowing when to let the heart rest. Emily whispered a quiet thank you to the past, to the present, to the boy who had become a man, and to the woman she had finally become. And as the house grew still, her heart felt full, not with longing, but with peace.